the topic of sitting is not a particularly sexy topic, and it's not one that many people in the health and wellness industry feel drawn towards. I think that the most comprehensive and useful resource in this would probably be actually the book which inspired the name for my podcast, Desk Bound by Kelly Starrett, the founder of CrossFit. Now, the problem with that is that, I mean, Kelly's an incredibly brilliant man, but he doesn't really land the plane, so to speak. Like, he operates at and thinks at and writes at such a high level that for the layman, it's like they're not even going to remotely understand a word that he's saying. And that's a big problem with so many experts. It's like the curse of knowledge. You forget what it's like to be a beginner, and you can't make what you're talking about relatable to the average person. And that's what I always do, what I always try to keep in mind. Like, could my brother who doesn't know anything about this stuff understand what I'm saying right now? And if he can't, then I need to come up with a story or a metaphor or a simpler explanation to, as I say, land the plane, to make it relatable and accessible to everybody, because the people who are going to be hesitant and resistant to, new dietary plans or new exercise things or things like that, who are unhealthy and sitting all day, I have to make it like the one subreddit, explain it like I'm 5. Like, I need to make it that simple, because if your goal as a health and wellness professional is to help people improve their health and their lives, then you need to craft your message and craft your lesson that you're teaching them in a way that they are most likely to actually apply it and get the results that you know they're capable of getting. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing them and yourself a disservice. Hello, boys and girls. Welcome back for another episode of the Desk Bound podcast. This is the first new episode I've recorded in a while, and it's also one of the episodes that I most enjoyed recording. I'm sure that part of this is the fact that I kind of forgot how fun it is to have these conversations with smart people about complex health and wellness topics, and this interview was a great reminder of that fact. But the other reason that I enjoyed it so much is due to the format of this interview, which is a little bit different from some of my previous ones. Instead of interviewing a guest about their knowledge or experience, this time my previous guest, coach, and now good friend Lawrence Neal of the Corporate Warrior podcast interviews me about my journey with high-intensity strength training. The first 20 to 30 minutes is specifically about that journey and how much progress I've made. Now, this part was great because the changes over the past year have been pretty astounding. I lost a solid 25 to 30 pounds and have gotten noticeably stronger in all areas. And as much as I loathe the incredibly vain gym bros who like to take so many shirtless mirror pictures, I did take some before and after pictures to gauge my progress, and the changes are pretty damn significant. So I included those in the accompanying blog post if you want to check them out and see what is possible with this kind of approach. But then we dive into a number of different health and wellness topics, discussing how our understanding of and approach to each area has changed over the past year or so. We touch on so many topics that I've wanted to discuss for quite a while, but I didn't feel like I had a good opportunity to do so, and this chat with Lawrence filled that gap perfectly. Lawrence and I discuss how high-intensity training fits into other aspects of health and wellness, why I dove into it so wholeheartedly as a result, and the results that it's helped me to achieve, how our opinions about diet have changed and why I've stopped doing intermittent fasting, the effect of technology on stress and sleep, and the importance of sleep to overall health, the new direction that I'm planning to take the Desk Bound podcast in the future, and so many other things that I couldn't even begin to cover them all here. So enjoy this chat with my friend Lawrence Neal, host of the Corporate Warrior podcast.
Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to corporatewarrior.co. My guest today is Brandon Olin. Brandon is the founder of Desk Bound and the host of the Desk Bound podcast, where he helps busy professionals undo the damage of sitting so they can live a long and healthy life. Welcome to the podcast, Brandon.
Thanks for having me on, Lawrence. It's been a little while since I published one of my own, but it feels good to be back on the air.
You're welcome. And no, it's good to catch up. It's been a while since we spoke, and I'm excited to record this with you because It's just, I suppose, a slightly different angle on what I would normally do. So, just like I guess a kind of a little bit of background for those listening is the focus of this episode is going to be about Brandon's experience with high intensity training. So, you've probably been doing. How long have you been doing HIIT for? Would you say at this point?
I've been doing it for probably about a year and 3 months or so. One of the questions we had on here was what got you into HIIT? And it was actually the first podcast interview that I did with you. That's when I got, immersed into the world of HIIT, and that's when I began doing it in my own life. And I believe that was right around New Year's when they switch over from 2017 to 2018.
Okay, so just over a year then in that case. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so that was the. Had you been looking into high intensity training before our podcast at all?
I hadn't. No, the only high intensity anything that I knew of was high intensity interval training, which had been a staple of my workout plan prior to that. I had read about like afterburn, they call it, and all those sorts of things. But I had done some strength training. I did things like strong lifts, 5x5 and whatnot. But the idea of training to failure and the benefits of all that were, it wasn't a subject that I was very knowledgeable about just yet.
Yeah, cool. That's really nice to hear because I think a common challenge people have in here is trying to articulate it in a way so that people can understand it and then motivate them to actually take action and do it. Because exercise is very complex, or can be very complex, depending on how deep you go. And it's easy for people to get really passionate about talking about all the science and then just totally confuse someone or push someone away. And so I've been trying over the years, I've been doing this and doing the podcast to get better at simplifying it. So it's good to know that I was good enough at doing that when we spoke. But I won't take all the credit because I know that after that, I think you started looking into more of Drew Bay's work. I think you bought Project Kratos. Do you want to talk about kind of what happened after that got you to really give it a go and kind of the rabbit hole you went down?
Yeah, so, a couple things there. So first of all, one of the things that really brought me into the world of HIIT was the science. I've always been interested in the scientific side of things. And before all of this, I was very knowledgeable about low carbohydrate diets and the damage that excess carbohydrate intake causes and insulin resistance and all of those things. So when it was explained to me, I think it was first Dr. Doug McGuff's talk at the 21 convention that I watched that really hit it like it all snapped together, was the understanding that insulin resistance occurs when you got all this excess glycogen in the muscles, and that the higher order muscle fiber tissue is more glycogen dependent. So fully depleting it in that way is very beneficial to that end. When I understood that, it's like all the pieces clicked into place, and I was like, okay, now I get why this is so important. But yeah, as far as sort of my journey through all that, we had our conversation. Then I watched that talk with Drew Bay. I read Body by Science. I picked up Project Kratos, and I've gone through a couple of different variations of a protocol. For a little while, I was doing something similar to, the Big Five that Dr. McGuff calls it. And then I eventually just settled on Project Kratos, Drew Bay's approach, just because for me, it's all about, the fewer barriers you put between you and the activity that you're trying to promote, the more likely you are to adhere to actually continuing that activity. So for me to be able to do it with just, a door frame hook-on pull-up bar and a set of push-up handles, in my apartment, it's like I'm almost never going to miss a workout unless I'm feeling sick or something, because I have literally no excuses at that point.
Yeah. And I know we spoke about before about you potentially, this is a while ago now, potentially looking at a personal trainer. And I remember, I think when you were living in Buffalo, you couldn't really find anything local. And now that you live in Colombia, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, Medellin,
right?
Colombia.
Yeah. That's it. And I think you laughed the last time I asked you if there were any trainers nearby, but I'm assuming there's not.
I mean, no, there's no HIIT trainers here. But I'm sure I could benefit from having a trainer. It's definitely just not accessible where I am, even if it's just for a few sessions, just to, tweak and fix the things that I'm messing up on. It's just very inaccessible, where I am geographically in the world at the moment. There's plenty of trainers, but not who take this type of approach. They all actually seem like pretty terrible trainers in general.
Well, you know that
Language
now
barriers
after.
aside.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting because I think you might be an outlier in some respects in that you definitely took it on yourself to learn how to do this. I mean, we did have a kind of coaching relationship a while ago where I helped you kind of get started and helped you kind of through the first, I guess, 6 to 9 months of your journey. But you've certainly taken it upon yourself to learn and kind of be able to execute all of this inside the comfort of your own home. Although I think you did have a stint of doing this in the gym as well, didn't you? So now you've returned to doing it at home. Is that more from a just simplicity, more easier to follow at home versus having to get to the
Yeah,
gym?
it's a couple things. I mean, that's part of it. I personally like doing body weight strength training more than weight-based strength training. This is something that Drew Bay wrote about in Project Kratos, but I found personally relevant to me as well. When you strengthen yourself by moving your body through space, it feels as if that increased strength translates better to whatever physical activities you want to accomplish outside of exercise. So, for example, for me, my biggest hobby right now is playing beach volleyball. I play like at least once a week scrimmage games, and then I have like 3 separate practice sessions for 2 hours each that I go to now. Like, I've just gotten completely into the sport, and when I'm strengthening myself by, say, doing my one-legged split squats, or I don't remember the proper terminology for that,
Yeah.
but it feels like that translates better to being able to jump higher than it would be if I was doing like squats with a heavy barbell on my back. And that could just be, placebo, but it definitely feels like that in my experience.
Yeah, it seems to make sense to me that may transfer better. And you're around 6'2", aren't you? If I remember.
No, I'm
Height-wise.
5'11". Right now I
Oh,
weigh about, when I weighed myself last, I was 164 pounds. I'm not
right.
sure
Okay.
what that translates to in kilo or stone or any other non-dumb American measurement unit.
No, that maybe that's
Not
that's
that
your
the stone
stature
is a
then.
smart unit measurement, but
It's not. No, I'm just for some reason I thought you were taller. But no, I was thinking because volleyball players tend to be quite tall. At least the those that go on to make a career out of it. But no, that's really cool. I'm really because you're always open to trying new things, and I think you've tried a number of different hobbies and sports certainly since I've known you.
yeah.
So this is kind of a new thing you're trying out, is it? Which you seem to be become very passionate about very quickly, from what it sounds.
Yeah, definitely. We the big thing we did before was playing ultimate frisbee, which is fun. I think it's for me it was a good social thing because people come and go in a city like this very frequently. And when you have a sport like ultimate frisbee that has very little hard skills that are difficult to pick up, it's like, can you run? Can you throw a frisbee? Can you catch a frisbee? Yes, you can play. So it's very easy to bring people into a social setting like that. And volleyball is a bit more of a skill barrier that is tougher for some people to break through. And it also gets really annoying when beginners come and then, it's like if the ball goes to them, it's not gonna, like, that point is over because it's just they can barely keep the thing up in the air. So it's like, it's a very different sort of thing. But I kind of have always been a bit obsessed with acquiring and improving upon new skills. And I haven't had anything like that in the physical activity sports space since like my high school years, except for, a few stints training in different types of combat sports, which I enjoyed. But I was always a solo artist when it came to sports growing up. I always played the things where I didn't have to rely on teammates. I joked about it the other day with a friend that, I didn't ever want to play on teammates with a bunch of, arrogant little pricks because I was an arrogant little prick who couldn't tolerate other arrogant little pricks. So, like, for me, it's like, okay, maybe you got to learn how to work with people a little bit more, Brandon. You can't do everything yourself. And for me, volleyball was a really good outlet for that.
Yeah, nice. Now there's a kind of a how do I put this? Common belief. It may even be more than a belief. Probably, perhaps there's some real kind of evidence and fact behind this that strength training or high intensity training helps awaken the active genome in all of us. As you get stronger, you then are more inclined to do more activity. Now, when I first met you, if I remember rightly, you were doing stuff. Like you were, I think you were maybe doing some kind of martial arts. So you weren't a sedentary person.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that since you've got stronger, since you've been doing strength training more regularly and more intensely, do you think that that has made you more active overall, or is that kind of a not been the case with you? You've always been kind of active.
Yes and no. I mean, prior to our interview, I had been somewhat active. But that was tough because like I was active and then Buffalo winter started setting in, and that like necessitates being less active because you just can't, like when you're buried under feet and feet of snow, you can't be as active as you'd like a lot of the time. But I was still going to the gym and doing other stuff like yoga. That was mostly just because that's what was accessible around me based on where I lived. I wasn't going to drive to like the MMA gym, like 5 miles across town when the snow is causing traffic to move along at 10 miles an hour. And it's going to take me 20 minutes or a half hour to get there. Like it becomes too cumbersome to keep up with certain habits just based on the hoops you have to jump through in daily life to get at it. So that definitely affected my activity level at the time. And coming down here to Colombia has definitely helped me become more active as well. But I think that for me, the big thing, it has made me want to be a little bit more active, partially just in general. I do feel like I have more energy, but also because I have gotten significantly stronger and lost a good bit of weight. And for me, that translates directly to an increased level of physical capacity to do the things like the idea of being able to jump up and do a proper spike was it seemed less feasible before because that's an 8-foot high net. Then you have to jump high enough to get your hand well over it in order to hit the ball down, and it's like the stronger you get, it seems like there's a smaller barrier between you and what you want to accomplish in the physical realm of sports or whatever else it is. So it has given me a little bit more energy and made me want to be a bit more active, but it's also given me a greater motivator because I feel like I can accomplish more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does, absolutely. And I should say I should rephrase what I said earlier and say the active genome thing is a theory, although it does seem to make a lot of sense to me. And it seems very self-evident in people that start this kind of thing. You talk to trainers that tell you that their clients are just so much more active and you can't stop them from being more active. And just to wrap up this bit about, why you got into high intensity training, what convinced you, there's a statement you emailed me which said, it's the one thing you do in terms of physical exertion to maximize health and longevity. So, and I guess you kind of echoed that when you were talking about Doug's presentation at the 21 convention, which again is the same presentation that completely changed my life because it was after that I read Body by Science and started the podcast and blah, 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 blah. So that was really the lead domino. So you've kind of come to the point in your experience training and then also your continuous learning, because I know you're really interested in all things health and diet, and obviously your business is focused around helping busy professionals with the same kind of things related to sitting. So it kind of clicked for you that this is one of the key components to optimizing health and longevity. Now, did that click for you during the 21 convention presentation, or has that just occurred to you since then? Has there been any other key moments like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of factors. The thing that I mentioned earlier about, this type of training being optimal for depleting stored glycogen and curbing insulin resistance was definitely a big factor, because I know from my own research that insulin sensitivity decreases over your lifetime, so you become less insulin sensitive as you age. So you need to do everything that you can, use every tool in your arsenal in order to combat that issue. And this is an incredible way to do that. Also, I don't know the mechanism behind this, but I've heard you reference and also read things before that state that essentially your likelihood of encountering adverse health conditions goes down, and basically how healthily you age improves the greater amount of muscle fiber you have on your body. And the fact that this is the only type of strength training I've done that's actually helped me to noticeably improve my visible muscle on my body of all the ones that I've done. I mean, I've gotten a little bit stronger with strong lifts 5x5 and things like that, but the difference between that and high intensity training is pretty much night and day. Like, I mean, I feel kind of like what's the word I'm looking for here? Not arrogant, but when somebody's I feel very vain saying this almost, but like some days, when I get out of the shower, I stand in front of the mirror, I'm like, damn, like nice, like
Yeah, good for you.
compared to a year ago, it's like night and day. It's a completely different change, and I know that if I was a little bit stricter with my diet, I could probably be doing even better. But the fact is that even when I eat, if I eat crappy, like have some beers or some crappy carb-laden food or whatever, the fact is that when I'm depleting the glycogen in that way, I know that this is curbing a lot of that damage. So it's like I still am trying to get better at those things, but I don't let it bother me as much and I don't stress out about it. And I think that not stressing out about those things is actually beneficial overall, because when you're stressed out, you're less likely to do the things you know are good for you.
Yeah, here, and we're all working on that, I think. So no, and I've been sort of with you during a lot of that journey, and it's been really interesting to see you just incrementally improve. And no, that's been awesome. And just to your point there about, it's funny how you were hesitant you didn't want to sound too arrogant or cocky or whatever about that comment. But what's wrong with saying? I mean, it's silly, right? But we should be proud of our what we've achieved, and if that improved the way we look, and we should be proud of that, and we should be comfortable in telling someone else that. So just a note to say, I find that inspiring when you say that, so don't feel like you can't express yourself. But no, I mean, I've seen the difference, and with your permission, hopefully we can put your before and after on the blog post to this, so people can see, because it is quite remarkable. And the thing is, you weren't, with someone like you, I mean, you weren't in bad shape before. I mean, your body fat percentage was, I don't know, was it around 20%, maybe slightly higher than that?
Yeah, I mean, like we've said before, those are the numbers I took with the sculpt. So, the accuracy of them might be suspect, but for more concrete numbers, I think I was sitting in the high 180s, like 187 pounds or so. And I dropped down, now I sit in the low 160s, so that's about 25 pounds or roughly 10 to 12 kilos. So that's a pretty significant difference. And like I said, I've noticed that even though I have slimmed down, my muscles have gotten somewhat larger. So it's like an even larger shift in, quantity of body fat on my body than just that 25 pounds, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is even though it's not one of those crazy body transformations where it's like 25 stone male is now 10 stone and shredded, it just shows that even someone who it didn't have actually that much change to make is still able to make what seems quite a radical transformation when doing these kinds of things. Now, with your training, talk to me about how it's changed over time. So maybe we can talk about it over, say, the last 6 to 9 months, how the training's changed, how maybe your volume and frequency's changed, what you've learned about that in order to make it work for you.
Yeah, so a bunch of things have changed on the training. The actual exercises that I'm doing have changed a great deal over time. It's more or less Project Kratos, but there's like 1 or 2 movements that I skip. But basically at the moment, we've got like chin up, push up, split squat on each leg, and then a sort of a modified pike push up. This is something I wrote about in the notes that I sent you the other day. Basically, I was doing putting my legs up like on the couch, and then extending them horizontally along the ground so that my torso is perfectly perpendicular with the ground, because I felt that would strain them more than the regular pike push-up. But putting my legs on there right after squats was making it difficult for me to balance with my legs. So I started putting my knees on there. That way there's less different forces at play, and that seemed to help a great deal. So we got pull-up, push-up, both side split squats, that type of pike push-up. And then we've got a leg raise style of ab exercise, and the prone trunk extension for the lower back. So those are the big movements that I'm doing right now, and it seems to be working out pretty well. The biggest shifts over time that I would say, for me, it's literally like a learned skill, learning to seek out and embrace the fatigue and keep focusing on the specific muscle group that you're trying to work has been incredibly difficult, but something I've gotten a lot better at over time. Like, it was only this past workout or two that I really feel like I got like a significant level of fatigue in on only my biceps and avoiding recruiting other muscles into play during the chin-ups. Not that, you don't want to affect any other muscles with that activity, but avoiding a deterioration of form essentially is like something that has been incredibly difficult, but I've improved on a lot over time.
So you felt a greater fatigue and pump in the bicep this time around doing the chin up?
Absolutely, yeah, and that was. I think that was also helped by the fact that, as I said to you, I also moved up to the next level of difficulty in that exercise because it felt like I was plateauing. So I think that helped that issue as well. Yes.
Yeah. And for those listening, Brandon's referencing Project Kratos, which is a fantastic ebook by Drew Bay, which if you're interested in bodyweight HIIT, I totally encourage you to pick up a copy. And in there's a progression system that Brandon was alluding to then. When you said split squats, do you mean split squats or do you mean pistols, where you're doing single-legged squats?
Split squats. So my rear foot is
stance.
Elevated up on like a chair. Yes.
Right, yeah. Got it. Okay, I wasn't sure. Did you change that after? Was that a different workout in Kratos, or was that something that James Fisher might have advocated? Or?
Was James Fisher the one that we had the private conference call with? Yeah, that was because he alluded to the benefits of that, particularly to the hip flexors, which a lot of people have problems with due to sedentary lifestyle and sitting all day. So for me, that was kind of like a win-win. I needed a way to make squats more difficult for me because I was already reaching beyond that 90-second threshold. And if it had those additional benefits, I figured why not? And it seems to be working pretty well.
So one leg out in front with a 90-degree angle at the knee, and the other leg back behind you on the sofa, and then just a slow squat all the way down, and then each leg, the sort of one by one.
Sorry about that, folks. Just had to mute myself to cough. Yes, so essentially, and I do this at the highest level of difficulty you can with Project Kratos, the front leg out at about a 90-degree angle, the back leg elevated up on, say, the sofa, and then I don't let my thigh get more than above a 45-degree angle. So I only move between 45-degree angle and parallel with the floor, and when I'm parallel with the floor at the hardest position, I hold it statically there for 4 seconds. So that's the hardest iteration of this I've been able to come with, aside from just increasing the duration of that static hold. But I usually end up in the 80 to 90-second range, so it seems to be pretty good in terms of that. It seems to be hitting the numbers fairly well, though perhaps I could find a way to increase the difficulty, though that's always hard to do when you can't add additional weight to the exercise because you're doing it at home.
And you do train to failure on that. You're able to get to failure on that exercise. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because it's quite difficult for a lot of people to reach failure on body weight, lower body stuff, in my experience. So that's interesting. And it's not an exercise. I mean, I've done the exercise, but it's not something I do very much at all. So it's interesting to get your take on it. Okay, so I'm just curious, what have you found, as someone who has kind of embraced high intensity training, what have you found is lacking, do you think, in the high intensity training industry to support people like you? What have you found challenging? I mean, I suppose now that you've become quite good at just doing this yourself and you've found some resources to help you, but is there anything that comes to mind that's particularly challenging for you?
I mean, it's probably... I haven't found too many or any resources really that really in depth explain that sort of seeking failure kind of thing in a very beginner friendly way. There's this thing that I talk about a lot, like the difference between like logically knowing and like deeply understanding something. Like, as you do this more and more, your ability to seek that failure improves and you get a greater understanding of that. But logically knowing that is very different from being able to fully embrace it and do it to that level. And I don't know. Maybe that's just the kind of lesson that just has to learn through repetition, that people got to hammer, like, remember to don't run away from the pain, embrace the pain, that sort of thing. I don't know. Maybe if somebody can put something together that really deeply hones in on that fact. I like something that Drew Bay put out about this. Somebody, I don't know if it was a Q&A, if he does Q&A emails or what, but it was somebody said something like, what do I do when I've stopped enjoying my workouts? And Drew's like, why the heck do you have to enjoy it? It's like, you do this for like 10 or 20 minutes a week. Just embrace the suck and move forward. And it's like, yeah, sometimes we do need that smack upside the head. Like, listen, you idiot. Like, you're not, a child who mommy's looking after anymore. Just, this is work. It is a workout. Like, just embrace the work, do the work. Be glad it only takes you 15 minutes a week and that you're not going to 3 CrossFit classes a week and blowing out your shoulder anymore.
Yeah, I it's funny because I do agree with that, but I would challenge Drew a bit and say, I mean, I know that was in a
that was a social media comment thread or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm always I'm always hesitant to challenge someone who's wrote something on social media or said something on a podcast, because you laughing because you have a podcast, so you understand.
Well, I'm laughing because I know how that Drew can be a little bit incendiary at times, so he's not somebody that you want to make an enemy of.
That's a given. I mean, Drew shoots from the hip,
yeah.
But no, I just find it funny. I always say to people, a podcast or a social media comment or fill in the blank is a crystallized thought in time. And it's like, if when I listen back to some of my old podcasts, I mean, typically, which surprises me, I'm quite pleased about the way I come across. But sometimes I'm like, oh, that was a bit cringe, or oh, I don't believe that anymore, and that's, in a way, that's kind of nice because it means that people can see the journey, right? If they've been listening to the show from the beginning, then they can see how things have evolved, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I'm always hesitant to judge people, but on that comment, I will say that I do think I agree that for some people it is just embrace, get on with it. It's not supposed to be enjoyable, and I think it was Arthur Jones who said something like, if you look forward to your workouts or you don't dread them a little bit, then they're not hard enough, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
But I mean, for instance, if you talk to Luke over at Discover Strength, who's training, thousands of people every week, he's seen that novelty is quite important to get people to adhere long term, at least in a personal training environment. And I would also say for myself that whilst the key exercises are always going to be in there, right? I'm never going to go 2 weeks without doing a chest press or a leg press, and probably an overhead press or a chin up or some kind of vertical pull. So they're always going to be in there. But what I like to do is I like to play around at the edges. I like to change my workouts in terms of the volume and frequency, and then also salting in some new single joint smaller movements. And that's how I personally get novelty. And I do think that if you're doing this over the long term, which we all should be doing this forever, or this kind of thing, then I don't know, I think there are definitely some outliers who could do literally like the big 5 for the rest of their life. But I mean, I think most people need some sort of change. Would you agree with that? Or
possibly. So are you saying that, like Luke Carlson, the way that they train people over there is that they don't just do this same list of exercises every workout, they change it a little bit between workouts?
No. So I think, so just to be clear, they are very consistent with their training program, because obviously they need to be able to measure performance and progress. And so there is definitely, I imagine, I mean, without looking at their client records, I can't see, but they probably, I imagine, stick to the same workout for, say, 6 to 12 weeks or something like that. And then they would potentially change it. And I guess all of that is determined by the client's goals, and maybe if they've got some injuries or issues in certain movements, maybe exercise preference. But yeah, I mean, it would still be way more consistent than your traditional kind of boot camp, personal training regimen, fill in the blank protocol, which is changing every week because they don't want to be, because there's obviously, you understand that in strength training there's when you do something novel, you see improvements very quickly,
right?
And that's because your nervous system is adapting to the movement, and you're not necessarily getting stronger or seeing muscle hypertrophy. You're just getting better at the skill.
And
so a lot of traditional personal training kind of does that in the way of periodization, where they'll change variables all of the time, and it's kind of a bit cheeky because it's not productive.
It's not only that, but it's also morally questionable, because you're using means to allow or to help the client get benefits that are not the benefits they're seeking, but it appears as if they are making those improvements, so they keep paying you money. So that's kind of filthy, actually.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming in and saying that, because
you're trying to be a bit more diplomatic about it. No, I'm sometimes I shoot from the hip too. No, I just have a thought that I think might actually be of use to some HIT business owners based on the thing that I was describing earlier. So what could be a beneficial practice to implement is whenever they get and maybe this is something that HIT business owners come together and work on together, because they could all benefit from this. Whenever they get new clients in, do some sort of like debrief questionnaire, post-exercise interview on the first few workouts, and try to get a feeling or an understanding of what was going through their mind during the exercise itself. Because if you ask people those questions enough times, you're going to get like, oh, I was doing pretty good, and then it started to fail, and then I started to panic a little bit. And then if you can identify the thought processes that go in, then you can address those beforehand for new clients who come to say, look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to reach this point. You're not going to be able to push it up anymore. You're going to be feeling panic. And you need to if you can explain to them what it is they're going to feel beforehand and say that's okay, you need to keep going, because that's just like your primitive survival mechanism kicking in. If you can preempt those self-doubts, because those moments are kind of scary. When I first started doing HIT, and I was like, oh geez, what's happening? This doesn't feel good. But if you can tell people that those bad feelings are normal, they're going to walk away with a much more positive opinion of what they just did than a negative opinion that can come from that, quote unquote, scary experience. And I think that if you ask people after the workout, you ask people who go through the same experience these questions enough times, you're going to spot patterns in their answers. And then you can use that to create some sort of informative material to then teach your new clients with, so that they don't run into those same pitfalls, or those pitfalls don't seem as scary.
Excellent advice. Yep, completely agree. I think that's brilliant. Take that to the bank, guys. Okay,
the first one's free.
So I want to move on to diet, because I don't normally talk about diet as much these days. I think it's because I find it more scary than talking about strength training. And oh my god, I've changed my mind about diet so much over the years in terms of what's most effective, and calories in, calories out versus calories are information and hormones. And I can't tell you I'm even that sure about that these days. But you're a low carb advocate. You've already made that kind of relatively clear on this podcast. I kind of agree with you. I would always say to people, eat whole food, single ingredient food, but that generally, when you look at what that looks like in practice, it is low carb, right?
Yeah.
Because the high carb diet tends to be
or low glycemic index, if not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I would agree with that. So, you're changing your diet, and I don't want to miss this out, because a key ingredient to what went into your own transformation. And we know that body composition is a huge part of that is diet. So how did your diet change when we were working together?
So one thing that changed, and this was more early on in our time working together, was that I shifted from being kind of a low carb meat and vegetable type person to embracing a little bit more of the carnivore side of things. I always thought that vegetables were 100% vital and that you couldn't be okay without them. And then, as you know, I interviewed Amber O'Hearn, who's a carnivore advocate for my podcast, and some other low carb pillars like Ivor Cummins, who you had on, as well as Dave Feldman. And as my understanding of all that evolved, I began to embrace a bit more of what you would consider carnivore, or essentially zero carb. I haven't ever done it for a continuous period of time, just that. It'll be like a few days a week of that, and then maybe on the weekends I slack off a little bit. So that is one way that things have shifted. And the main other one, which I think is the one you're getting at here, is the whole thing with intermittent fasting. So I have shifted from previously doing a 6 to 8 hour eating window where I'd basically just have lunch and dinner, to now eating essentially most of my meals within a similar window, but doing so earlier in the day. So I specifically will eat a big breakfast when I get up at 5 a.m. I'll usually eat a second breakfast around 9 or so a.m. Then I'll eat a average sized lunch around noon or 1. And then if I do eat anything after that, it'll usually be a late afternoon snack, something light like like some quality deli meats like charcuterie, maybe some cheese, almonds, things like that. And part of the shift in that, as we've discussed before, was because of the issue of sleep, which is something that I've struggled with over time, and a lot of research casting doubt on, or basically pointing the finger at eating large meals later in the day being damaging for sleep. So that's kind of where that came from.
And that was Bill Lagarkos, is that correct?
Yeah, Bill.
Him that put you onto that?
Yeah, Dr. Bill Lagarkos. He was he's a doctorate of, I believe, nutritional biochemistry at University in Colorado. I can't remember the one, but he's been referenced pretty heavily. Rob Wolf pointed to him actually as a big resource that he used when he wrote his book Wired to Eat. He's a very, very intelligent guy, and a lot of what he says makes a lot of sense about how at night when we're trying to sleep, that's the time for your body to rest and recover. And when you eat meals later in the evening, you're forcing organ systems to be active that should be more dormant. So the thing that he points to is that, age-old advice of eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper, that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is funny because we've been taking the mick out of that, many of us embracing the traditional intermittent fasting of skipping breakfast. And it's kind of come full circle in a way.
Well, Bill refers to intermittent fasting as homeopathy level nothing sauce. And I'm not saying that that's the case. I do believe that there are beneficial effects of giving your digestive tract enough time in between meals to fully process and clear things out and give it a break, particularly with how many people you see dealing with issues in the gut. Like a lot of people in the carnivore community talk about how it can lead to this improvement in overall health, particularly among people with autoimmune issues. And I believe that if you're adhering to, a dietary approach of eat a bunch of small meals spaced throughout the day, like every 2 hours, you're never giving your digestive tract a break. You're kind of pushing it harder and harder, especially if you're eating a diet that's high in dietary fiber, because that's indigestible. You're putting something in the system that the system can't do anything with. It's like that can almost be a harder thing for that system, for the digestive tract to cope with, because it's this difficult, dense thing that it cannot process. So I do believe that there's benefit to giving your digestive tract a break in that way, but I believe that the largest benefits that people see from intermittent fasting comes from fasting-induced ketosis. That if you're eating a higher carbohydrate diet, this will induce a level of ketosis so that you can then begin curbing back insulin resistance and improving your health that way, even if you're not eating a low carbohydrate diet. And that if you are eating a low carbohydrate diet, then intermittent fasting may not be as beneficial for you as it would be for people who are eating a more standard American diet. And that is not based on too much scientific research. That's just me putting a bunch of pieces together and saying, I think this is what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got excellent retention, and I agree largely with what you said. I think, I'd agree. I think it was Scott that first put me on to Bill. First put me on to
Carnivore Cast, right?
Yeah, Scott Meslinski, yeah. He was on the podcast a while back. Good friend of mine, good guy. And he told me about Bill. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole, but Scott is very thorough in his own research. So no, I took that quite seriously, and I have brought my meals closer to the morning, not as early as you. Now, is there something also? I remember Scott saying something about cortisol spiking in the morning, and that breakfast being ideal for reducing that, or something to that effect.
That depends.
Is there any truth?
And some of what I'm going to say right now is, again, just based on my own understanding of the systems at play, and I can't cite specific scientific studies. But the thing is that cortisol is known as the stress hormone, and is one of the big things that spike during periods of extreme stress. And I'm partially of the opinion that I think that the cortisol spike has to do a lot with different lifestyle factors. For example, there might be some days when you go to bed and you're incredibly stressed out about work, and then you wake up in the morning still incredibly stressed out. If you don't give yourself enough time to sleep and then you have trouble falling asleep because you're stressing about how you're not getting enough sleep, and then you wake up stressed out again, that you see more cortisol that way. And I believe that you particularly see it higher levels. And again, this is not based on any studies, but when you wake up, particularly on insufficient sleep, to a very loud alarm. Because if you're sleeping in a very dark space and all of a sudden a very loud, high-pitched noise goes off, your evolutionary circuitry thinks that that's something dangerous that's coming to murder you. So if that's how you wake up, not naturally, kind of unnaturally in a way, that's going to cause cortisol to spike more than if you went to bed, relaxed and not stressed out, if you got sufficient sleep and you're able to wake up naturally without an alarm. So for example, one thing that I do to that end is I have what's called a wake-up light, which is an quote-unquote alarm that is tied to a lamp that gradually turns the lamp on over the course of a half hour. So I'm usually already wide awake before my noise-based alarm ever goes off. And so cortisol can spike in the morning, but I don't think it's natural for it to spike. If you look at any sort of biological markers and how they're affected on a circadian clock, essentially, you rarely see spikes. You see gradual increases. And so the only time you would see a non-gradual increase is when some external environmental factor is causing that increase to happen. So cortisol can be higher in the morning, but I think it doesn't have to if you mitigate the lifestyle factors that contribute to it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my opinion of the subject.
And I may have totally misquoted Scott, so Scott might want to chime in the comments on that one.
Yeah,
but no, that's really interesting.
To get into a moderated debate with Scott. I'm sure he does good work.
No, not at all. It's interesting. It's not, to be honest, I've really stepped back from reading too much lately about diet, sleep, because I don't know if you're the same, but I find I will go on like a whole binge of that stuff. I listen to loads of podcasts, read tons of books, and I just got so overwhelmed with, because it's like anything, right? The more you learn about a particular topic, the more you realize you don't know stuff about, or we don't know as a species even. There's still so many unanswered questions, and that can be for some people, or certainly for me, quite overwhelming and intimidating and scary. And I think that's why I've spent a lot of the last, I'd say, 6 months or so doing a lot less of that and a lot more focus on obviously my business and helping the businesses that I work with in high intensity training. But it's interesting because I know that you're probably spending a little bit more time than me at the moment on some of that stuff. So it's interesting to get your perspective because you're perhaps a little bit more up to date than I am.
Yeah, well, a good example of that is I was recently listening to, I haven't finished this and I don't know if I'm going to finish it because it's kind of unpleasant, a podcast interview on Rogan's podcast, which was like a debate between Gary Taubes and Stephen Guyenet.
Oh, that's difficult to listen to. That was,
Yeah. I mean, Stephen seems like a brilliant man. And like, I think that a lot of what he says is probably true and makes a lot of sense, but like uncomfortably combative. And the way, like, I'm listening to what he's saying and I'm like, okay, that does make sense. But if you're right and Gary's wrong, is that going to change what the average person needs to do in their diet on a day-to-day basis? Because if the issue is these hyper-palatable condensed foods, these ultra-processed ones, well, that's inherently going to lead to, for people to avoid that, that's inherently going to lead them to making almost the identical choices that somebody like Gary Taubes is recommending. So it's like, I get that as scientists or researchers, they need to look at this, but for people like us, it's like, we kind of already know what to do. And even if the research is changing our understanding of the mechanism, it's not changing the actions that we need to take. So it's really not worth focusing over for us at this point. It's like we kind of already have it figured out. Even if we can't explain everything down to the detail as far as what causes things, it doesn't change what we need to do. So like, let's just do what we need to do, because why bother obsessing over it?
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people know intuitively what to do, right? But I think the point of that debate wasn't necessarily, I could be wrong, to give the general public a solution. It was more to settle this, attempt to settle this scientific debate, which didn't get settled.
Yeah. Well, But yeah,
it's
what
interesting.
what I was getting at there is that like that sort of thing is like, okay, we're more and more just confirming what we already know. So like, I mean, for me, that was kind of a moment like, okay, maybe it's time for me to step back from this because, I've had some interesting revelations around that, after paying attention to some of Ted Naiman's stuff, particularly after interviewing Tyler Cartwright of Keto Gains for my podcast, and then diving into the whole protein leverage hypothesis and all of that, because I was a very strict low carb keto guy before then, learning that, okay, maybe, high protein is still okay, or that high protein, with carb and low fat can still be okay. That was an interesting revelation. But yeah, it's like at a certain point when you say, okay, like why, do I really need to keep diving deeper on this subject when it's just kind of confirming my existing suppositions?
Yeah, you're like can be splitting hairs for some people. Yeah, no, I obviously I'm a big fan of Ted. He actually did a great. Is it a GIF? Maybe not a GIF. One of his infographics. That's it on Twitter that he's famous
really
for.
Good at those.
He is. I asked him like, "Oh, you're so good, Ted. Like, do you have like a special app for that?" And he just said like he just basically said that he uses some very basic app on his phone, and I don't know. He made it out as if like a 5-year-old could do it. Was the way he said it. But he responded to that debate on Rogan by saying that both Stefan and Torbs, who I've had Torbs on the show, and he's a nice guy. I've not spoken to Stefan before, but he said they're both right in their own ways, and he kind of. And I'll link to the infographic because I won't be able to explain it here because I can't really recall the details. But he talks about how both play a role in terms of the hormonal, the body's hormonal kind of reaction versus what's happening in the brain. Cool. I had another thing I was going to mention to you, but it's I'm not on fighting form right now. I can't remember exactly what it is I was going to ask you. But anyways, moving on. I wanted to touch on sleep because. You mentioned there about using the natural light to wake up, and we do that. We have a Lumi, which does that. Is that the same device you use, a Lumi?
No, I have a different one. I'm struggling to recall the name of it right now. I believe it's called Lighten Up. That is one that you can only get in the US because the plug is specifically designed that way, but also you have to use a certain type of light bulb with it. Because the way that one works is it's not a whole standalone lamp. It plugs into the wall and then you plug your lamp into this device. And because like the voltage and all that is very specific, you have to use like incandescent light bulbs. You can't use LED ones, and it's this whole other thing. But I like that one particularly because you can get it, you can use whatever lamp you want with it, and it's only like $30 on Amazon. So I'll find the link for that and get that over to you so you can put it in the show notes if you want, because it's a really, really good product. I highly recommend it if you're in the States.
Yeah, totally. Send over. The device we use is exactly the same thing you described. It kind of like brightens up over time, and it's perfect. It's not, it's not jarring at all. There's no sudden, oh my God, like, yeah, it's a nice change from an alarm clock, which is something I used to use in the past. So yeah, I agree. I mean, we were trading notes before, and you said about how you've already talked about meal timing. So you believe how eating earlier in the day is better for sleep, reducing stress and presence of light. And you really feel like, I mean, have you dived into Matthew Walker's work on sleep at all? Have you been?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I listened to his interview on Rogan, and I picked his book up. I started it, but I didn't finish it. I did. I've interviewed 2 experts on sleep for my podcast as well, Dr. Narina Ramlakan, who's from the UK, and Dr. W. Chris Winter, who's from the States, and got a lot of good information from both of them as well. But I'm sure that they probably all talk about very similar things in their work. So was there something specific about Dr. Walker's work that you wanted to reference?
I don't know, nothing specific. I just found him really enjoyable to listen to. I mean, maybe it's because he's got a British accent, so that's quite nice to listen to someone who's British and smart.
Very soothing, yes. Dr. Narina is the same way. It's very soothing.
Yeah, I also mean it. It's because most of the experts in health and fitness tend to be American, right? Or at least those that are online. And so it was quite refreshing to hear. Oh, there's a smart person in sleep who's British, which is cool. No, so there was nothing specific. It was a lot of what he said was stuff I had heard from other people who I'm sure are pulling from similar research, maybe even his research. But what I found really profound was just how, and whether or not, I mean, I haven't looked at, reviewed his literature that he references, but, I take his word for it. And that is that sleep is just so damn important, and that if you don't get one of the things, it was something like if you're getting less than 6 hours, your heart or something was aging like 10 years older or something than your biological age or something like that. Don't quote me on everything I just said verbatim, but I think it was something around that, and that was pretty profound. And just the detrimental effects of not getting sufficient quality sleep seems to be pretty important.
Yeah. I think that a big thing in what you just said there that not enough people focus on is quality, because it's not just about how many hours you get. You can have varying different levels of quality where 8 hours of sleep might only make you feel as rested as 6, and vice versa, if it's of a good quality. And I think that that's something that many people struggle with these days as a result of, a whole bunch of things, but I think that technology is probably one of the biggest factors. The presence of light is a big one. Like, for example, I found these graphs that showed the presence of light over the course of a 24-hour period in a primitive hunter-gatherer like society, and basically around whatever the sunset is or begins setting around, say, 6 o'clock or so, you see the presence of light gradually decrease over the course of about an hour to 2 hours or so. Whereas for many of us in the modern world, we are watching TV, so we're watching a show on Netflix or something, we're getting bombarded with light, then we go into our bedroom, we've got lights on when we're brushing our teeth, we got lights on when we're reading, and then we flick them off and just try to fall asleep right away, and we wonder why we're not falling asleep. It's like, well, your body still thinks it's daytime and it's going to take time to adjust. And then sometimes you get stuck in a trap there where you're not falling asleep, so you're getting stressed out and frustrated that you're not falling asleep, and then those thoughts are releasing all of these chemicals and hormones in your body. They're making it harder to fall asleep. So I think that presence of light is a big one, but I think that it's the technology devices themselves that are an even bigger one, because if you're scrolling through like your Facebook news feed right before you go to bed and you see, somebody from the opposing political party said this crap, and you're like, that freaking idiot, let me type a angry comment. Look at all the comments. It's like those things are triggering stress hormones in your body and in your brain that, it's like I said, you see very uniform increases and decreases. They're very gradual. It's like they oscillate up and down like sound waves. Like as the presence of light goes down, cortisol levels go down. And I don't remember was melatonin the sleep hormone? Presence of melatonin
Correct.
goes up gradually. And you just see these gradual shifts. But I wouldn't be surprised if we've got like a staccato, like up and down and up and down and up and down, because we're leading these incredibly high stress lives where we've got millions of people or companies competing for our attention on social media, and that's causing us to be in an elevated state of presence and being an elevated level of arousal, you could call it, more so than is evolutionarily normal. And that's causing so many of these issues that people are having with sleep, where I like the title of my one guest Narina's first book about sleep, Tired But Wired. It's like, have you ever felt that feeling when you're dead tired at the end of the day, you put your head on the pillow and your brain's just running a mile a minute, your brain's just completely wired? It's like, why is that so common? Well, I think that social media and smartphones are probably one of the biggest contributing factors, if I had to put it on anything.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know we shared notes on that article that went round on how to make your phone more productive.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and I spent practically, no, I'm not gonna lie, I spent an entire day optimizing my phone, and people might hear that and think, what a waste of time. But I tell you, my average use of my phone now is less than an hour a day.
Mm-hmm. Same,
right?
yeah, mine's decreased dramatically.
Most people, 6-7 hours, something like that, I imagine.
Well, it depends what numbers you go off of, because I don't think that that's always phones. I believe, it depends what you go off of and what place you're talking about, what country, because I've seen numbers like that for staring at screens in general, though considering most people work at computers these days, that number actually seems kind of low. So maybe it is that high. Yeah, I take that back. I'm probably wrong on that.
Yeah, I think it is, and I looked at a few friends' phones, and that was kind of the stats because
Hmm.
you've got the thing now that shows you how long you've been on your phone,
Hmm.
and in a nutshell, I mean, I'll link to it in the post because I think it's fantastic, and I sent it to so many productivity nerds afterwards because I was like, you will love this. And basically, it makes you delete a lot of distracting apps on your phone. It makes you organize your phone so that you use it more productively. You know, the phones, they're not even phones anymore. They're personal computers, and they offer an enormous amount of utility to our lives, and we should be very grateful. And it's a wonderful thing that we
Hmm.
have, but it doesn't come without the cost and the distraction. And by making your phone work more for you, it's a great investment. So I highly encourage people to check out that, and it will be in the show notes to this one. Did you implement that as well? I think you said you did,
Yeah,
or you
well,
started to. Yeah.
I did. Yeah, the thing is that I'd already done a lot of those things before I ever came across that. I had gone through and like thought about, okay, what are my time waster apps? What do I go when I've got like when I'm bored or I feel like I've got nothing else to do that I go just to, literally like just drip dopamine into my brain. Like, what are those things? So I was like, all right, Instagram gone, Facebook gone. I actually even got rid of email for a little while, but I finally put that back on because I basically turned my phone into a device that could only call, text, or I could do Duolingo Spanish lessons on. That's all I could do on my phone, essentially. I mean, I had like Google Chrome, but I never really used it. So that allowed me to do what my own guest, Narina, the sleep specialist, calls cultivate a healthier relationship with technology. Because once I'd done that and I'd realized like the addictive nature of that and I'd distanced myself from it and I took like a month off and I kind of like got those habits out of the way, I have since reinstalled email and reinstalled Instagram, and I don't use them in the same time wasting, distracting way as I used to. So I feel like definitely taking some time to separate from those is incredibly beneficial. One other thing that I wanted to touch on, I forgot to mention this earlier about the whole sleep thing, and this is part of why I've shifted away from intermittent fasting. So as you're supposed to see that gradual change in these different biomarkers, throughout the day. And one thing that often happens, so first of all, people wake up in the morning in the pitch black to an alarm clock, and then, it's going to cause a little bit of a spike of cortisol. And we're so busy and stressed out, oftentimes people will, they will skip breakfast unintentionally or intentionally if they're intermittent fasting, and then they will drink coffee or a latte or whatever, and caffeine also spikes cortisol, and then they have to commute into work, and if they're commuting in the States, as are they're commuting by car, and driving in busy rush hour traffic is also very stressful. So you're creating this very early spike in all of these stress hormones and the related things, which are very detrimental, to overall health and longevity, and also just your sanity. So there's a little bit more to it as far as those things go as well. So it's it's definitely easier to do if you don't have to commute into an office. But if you do, and particularly, that's the thing that Dr. Narina recommended. I always ask my guests if you could tell everybody to do one thing to improve that area of their life, what would it be? For her, she said, I can't do one, I have to do two. I'm like, all right, fine, do two. She said, cultivate a healthy relationship with technology. And if you wake up and your nervous system is nervous, like you wake up and you feel stressed out or you feel like you're a little bit jittery already before your day's even started, then eat breakfast within a half hour of waking up. And I've noticed that helps a lot. When I wake up stressed out, if I eat breakfast right away before drinking any caffeine, I immediately feel a lot calmer, which has been very interesting to see.
Very interesting. Funny what you said there about email on the phone. I deleted that off the phone, and it's interesting because it's important to do, I think, a cost benefit analysis of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I put email back on my phone because there was a few moments where I needed it because I needed to access an email for, I don't know, a train ticket or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, I'm just going to leave it on there now. It's on the phone. I need it. But the funny thing is I've become, maybe I need to do that 30-day detox you mentioned, but I've now become addicted to checking email on my phone. Not to a ridiculous amount, like not like 30 times a day, but definitely I will check it ad hoc. And I think that's an unhealthy behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And before doing that, I would have scheduled time to check my email, and I would check it at my laptop.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. I mean, no one's going to die if you don't respond to their email in 24, 48 hours. But it's interesting because we're just like, oh no, I need this app because I need to be able to have access to that. But Carl Newport talks a lot about this in Deep Work, but we don't think about the bigger picture. We don't think about the net effect. So I don't think, okay, you have this app, you can do this, but you know what? It's going to distract you 30 times the app, and that's going to affect your health and your sense of well-being and your quality of life and everything else, and diminish willpower and fill in the blank. And I just think we need to start looking at these things like tools that help us, and we need to evaluate them like tools. And if they're not providing a net benefit, we need to get rid of them. There are days that, it's difficult. You're in the same business as me with content, and we have slightly different opinions on social media, although I think we agree on a lot, but I think maybe we have slightly different approaches. But there are days where I just want to get rid of all of social media and just continue doing the best work I can on the platforms I own and not be distracted by any of that other stuff. But I can't deny that, social media can be a very effective marketing tool, helping get the word out there. So huge digression. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that at all.
Yeah, well, I think that the email on the phone thing is a particularly pernicious issue if you're the type of person who struggles to separate work life from home life. Like if you don't have a hard stop at the end of the day and you're constantly checking emails when you're supposed to be spending time with your girlfriend or your wife or kids or whatever, and you're the type of person who's going to bed at night and you're trying to sleep but you can't because you got work thoughts running through your brain, I think that's the type of lifestyle where you need a clear line, a clear dividing line between your work and your personal lifetime. And that if you have email on your phone, that's like, it's going to be that much harder to create that clear dividing line. So I think that that's an incredibly important thing for that. I think that social media depends. For example, I've just recently discovered some more things to help me deal with it, to make it, as we've discussed before, work for you, not against you. So, for example, on my laptop, I use Google Chrome, and I have the Facebook newsfeed blocker installed on my laptop. So every time I open up Facebook, I don't see any of the newsfeed. It's just like a blank space with an inspirational quote there. So right away, that gets rid of a lot of it. But sometimes I also get distracted by the little notification bubble in the top right corner. And what I just recently realized is you can go into Facebook settings and change what you get notified for. So I turned off notifications, basically like friend has activity, friend tags you in a post, this, that, the other thing. I don't want to see any of that. So now I only get updates from essentially like my business related groups and very specific groups related to health and wellness that I want to keep up to date on. So it changes it from essentially a distraction machine where people are trying to sell you things into a more proactive tool you can use to whatever thing you want to accomplish, which is kind of what you're saying with Cal Newport said. You always have to keep the bigger picture in mind. Don't let this tool use you to sell things to you. Figure out what you want to accomplish with that tool and then tweak it and refine it and hone it so that it is the best possible tool for that purpose.
Yeah. Couldn't say it better myself. I thought it was very well put, and I completely agree. I just wanted to, I guess, jump back to some of the habits quickly. I guess we've got time for a couple final questions here. You've talked about, so we've covered obviously a lot of the things that I think have been really helpful to you in terms of improving your body composition and improving your overall health. Training's played a huge part of that. But I think it's important for, I guess, those listening to understand the other factors. Diet, sleep have no doubt played an enormous role. And these are things which I guess as personal trainers and business owners will be, if they're doing, consultancy beyond strength training, they may want to dive into some of the resources that we've both mentioned, or you've mentioned most of them, to actually get a better understanding of these factors to help them with their clients' progress. But you've also talked about movement, and just interested to know what thoughts you've got. I think you're well positioned to talk about this because, with the Desk Bound podcast, it's something that you're fairly passionate about and talk about quite a fair bit. What's your thoughts about movement in general? How important is it? And how do you do that yourself?
So, yeah, I believe that movement is overall fairly important. I don't think that you need to be moving a ton each day. A lot of the research that I've read and the people that I've talked to points less to the quantity being important and more to the frequency being important. So one example I give is that you can get a lot or undo a lot of the damage of sitting all day if you just take breaks throughout the day to move around. So, for example, in the States, most employers are legally required, in addition to a lunch break, to give employees 15-minute breaks in the mornings and evenings. So, for example, if you take a break to go for a walk in each of those 15-minute breaks, and after you eat lunch every day, you're going to undo a lot of the damage right there, particularly because I think that if we're talking like an 80-20 approach to things, the 20% to get the 80% is movement after meals. Because a ton of studies have shown that if you, for example, take a 10-minute walk after eating a meal, you can see a massive decrease in the blood sugar spike and the ensuing insulin response. And I'm not sure particularly what the mechanism is at play there. I don't know if the body's thinking like, okay, they're moving right now, let's direct this to the muscles for glycogen storage as opposed to circulating around in the bloodstream and being this whole chaotic mess. I'm not quite sure what the mechanism is that causes that, but a lot of studies have shown that if you simply take time to go for a walk after meals, you can undo a lot of the damage that heavy carb meals can cause. So I think that frequency and timing can be a lot more important than quantity when it comes to movement. Now, if you live in a place that's conducive to it, I think it is good to move more. For example, I live in a city, as I just described before the call, that's got an awesome set of bike paths. So I don't even have a car down here. I just ride my bicycle or walk everywhere, and usually walk or bike at least a few miles every day. I feel that that's pretty good just to sort of get myself up and moving around. Maybe there is some thing to the hit active genome thing that makes me want to do that more, because I always feel better when I move more. If I just stay in my part of town around my apartment and I don't move much at all, I always kind of feel like a waste of space. So I think for overall feeling better, it's a good thing, especially if you're getting outside or getting sunlight on your skin and things like that. But it's all lifestyle dependent. What is feasible and reasonable based upon where you live and what type of life you live, what type of professional life you live. Do you got kids at home that are taking up all your attention? So many factors are at play that if you can't do anything else, I think that, taking a walk after meals is like a good starting point. And especially if you are somebody with like kids, take some time to take a walk with your kids so you can actually talk to them and listen to them, instead of just, kid's screaming over here and throwing his feces at the wall. This kid's doing this crazy stuff. Just give him the iPad so he can watch his show. It's like, no, take a walk after a meal, minimize the blood sugar impact, and spend some time with your family. Like, that's a simple thing to get a pretty huge impact.
I love it. Yeah, take them out in nature. Go for a walk, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
It sounds so basic, but one thing I really enjoy doing now is when my fiance gets back from work. So we have a small dog, and
a yappy dog.
No, not really. She's active though. She's a little rat terrier. She's fast asleep at the moment on the sofa. It's the cutest thing you've ever seen if you're into that kind of thing. But we were quite fortunate, or the dog's quite fortunate in that I will work from home quite often, and so she generally gets around 3 to 4 walks a day, which is great because it forces myself to be more active, to be out in nature. It's like, I'm not going to say it's like having kids, but I think that having additional responsibilities will, whilst they might be a little bit in the moment, you're a little bit like, no, I can't be bothered. It's a very positive behavior. So point I was going to make before is, when Ash gets back from work, that's her turn to take a dog for a walk. But recently I've just been going out with her because it's a really nice opportunity for us. Just, Ireland's a beautiful place. I mean, the weather can be a bit unpredictable, but we'll just go to the local field or what have you, or there's quite a few sort of trails around here, and we'll take the dog and we'll just talk about the day. She'll tell me about her day, I'll tell her about mine. We might not talk much at all. It might be quite a lot of silence, but we'll just be walking the dog, moving, and just using it as an opportunity to get some movement in the day, do a little bit of bonding, because if it's a weekday, maybe she's quite tired from work. Maybe when we get back from the walk, we just both want to just chill, maybe not have a great deal of conversation. So I found that to be a great little life hack, if you will,
Yeah.
to get a lot of those things achieved in a set time every day. But yeah, get a dog is my advice to most people.
No, I mean,
You will move a lot more.
yeah, I agree with all of that for a bunch of other reasons, but some of them which are backed up by the science. One, I mean, this is something that I came up when I was interviewing Bill DeSimone. He talked about how whenever he has a new client, if they're like an older person come in, what's the first thing you recommend? Or when I asked him, what's the one thing you recommend people do if they've been neglecting their training for a while, he says, just start walking. We don't think of it as exercise, but it is exercise, and you generally feel better after doing it. A bunch of studies have shown walking, 20 minutes a day can be as beneficial as some more complicated, expensive therapies for dealing with back pain. And it's like, how common of a problem is that? That's a pretty big improvement if that's all you have to do. And for me, walking sometimes is almost like meditation. It's like if I'm really stressed out about stuff or I got a ton on my mind and I go and I take a walk, particularly when I'm not, this was something that I picked up from Dr. Narina about sleep. She talked about how because we constantly inputting new information, we're never taking time to digest and process the information that we have in our brains and move it from like short-term memory into long-term memory storage or just discard it. So we have all these thoughts on our brain, and doing things like, one of the things I do is journaling, but also just taking a walk where you don't listen to a podcast, maybe you can listen to instrumental music where there's no lyrics or anything like that, and just let your brain go, just let it drift, just let it daydream, just let it do whatever. It's literally like you take the stress from a 10 and just dial it way down to a 2. For me, walking is literally like meditation. And this one guy, Paul Dudley White, he was one of the founders of the American Heart Association, and he was a major advocate of preventative care. And he said that on 2 separate occasions, he said one time that walking is man's best medicine, and that a rigorous 5-mile walk will do more good for an unhappy but otherwise healthy individual than all of the psychotherapy in the world. I'm like, it's the simplest thing, but it can have a massive impact. Just like put the phone down, leave the phone at home. In fact, you know what? Chuck the phone in a bonfire, get rid of it. Just go and take a walk and just do nothing, or just talk with somebody and just do that. And it's like, it's an incredibly potent medicine in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of this is kind of conventional wisdom, isn't it? But it's easily forgotten. And I think it's just important to reiterate it. I agree with a lot of what you just said. Good stuff. Well, Brandon, this has been a lot of fun. And I think it's been very useful for me. One of the things actually I just wanted to say is, like me, you probably get, in fact, we all get overwhelmed with information. I mean, people, we've just listened to this, just heard a whole bunch of stuff. We're like, I can't remember all that. I can't be bothered to do further research and find out about all that stuff. And I totally get that. And that's totally fine. And I'm the same, I try and consume stuff and I just cannot take it all in and act on it, and none of us can, right? It's just, there's so much information out there. But one thing I heard Tim Ferriss say was, and I think he took this from one of his mentors, is the good shit sticks, right? When you hear something that's so have faith, and when you hear something that's really profound, it will just stick and you won't have to try and remember it. And one of those things that you told me once was that lesson you learned about, sometimes it's good to go for a walk without a podcast and let the brain kind of sort itself out, and let the mind wander. And actually I've been doing that. So probably every second walk or so, I won't have a podcast in and I'll just be walking. And I'll just let my mind wander. Or I'll do Cal Newport's thing where he says, it's kind of like a form of meditation problem solving, where he suggests you take a problem and walk with it and try and solve it on your walk. So that's maybe a little bit different. But he's found that to be a really productive way of overcoming obstacles in his professional and personal life. And Deep Work is just a great read for anyone who's interested in becoming a bit more productive and a little bit happier in their overall life. I just want...
I've got one more for you similar to that, actually.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Have you ever watched the show Mad Men?
I haven't, but I know of it.
Okay, so this thing I came across, which years later I could not find the article again, and I wish I could because it was really good. But he created this thing called the Don Draper technique. Don Draper is the name of the main character, played by John Hamm in Mad Men. And at the one point, he's got his assistant or this new ad person he's training who's like can't come up with the right words to sell something, or she just can't figure it out. And so he tells her to think about it deeply and then just forget it. And something will just pop out at you. And the way that this translates into the Don Draper technique is take a problem, as you were saying, or something that you're dealing with, something that's been on your mind a lot lately, and just dive as deep as you can into that one problem. Just get a piece of paper and just write every single thought. Just brain vomit it all onto the page. Just get it all out there. And then just go like do your laundry, shoot a basketball around, walk the dog, do whatever. Because the unconscious mind is working on it, even if we don't realize that we're actively working on it. So you analyze every nook and cranny of that problem that you can, and then you step back and you do other things, and it doesn't feel like it, but the brain is working on that problem. It's like connecting it to other problems, it's processing it, it's thinking about it, and it makes it oftentimes a lot easier to solve those problems, or at least get a better viewpoint from them so you can decide if it's even a problem you need to address.
Totally. I love that. And that's why all the great ideas come up in the shower, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Einstein's wife said that he often had his biggest revelations about his work when he was playing his violin.
Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is so funny because I used to, spend days with Ash. We'd go, we'd have a day where I wasn't allowed. I mean, historically been quite a workaholic, so it'd be very difficult for me not to work, and I'd really have to pre-plan and schedule recreational time, and it used to upset her a lot because you
have to schedule leisure time. That doesn't sound very leisurely.
I know, no, it's ironic, isn't it? But I would this would really upset Ash, but we'd be out doing something, going for a walk, going for dinner, fill in the blank. And I would just suddenly get so inspired by an idea or by something. And I'd want to go and get to work, and she'd be like, and that's the worst thing you can say in that moment, because then they think, well, aren't you enjoying our time together? Mm-hmm. And now I've kind of totally switched my perspective on that. And now I understand what's happening because you just explained it there, that, your brain is working subconsciously, filling in the gaps, making the neural connections, figuring problems out for you. And then you're going to have those aha moments. So what I do is I'll capture it. So I'll do, getting things done. I have a list, an in tray, and I follow the kind of GTD method part of it, because I think the idea capture is genius. And this is David Allen's phrase, but the brain is for what's the quote?
That's
not
the thing.
For holding stuff. It's for creating ideas, not holding them, or something like that.
Yeah, no, I don't actually know, because I just started listening to your interview with David like yesterday or the day before, and I just picked up getting things done because I was like thinking that I need to get a handle on my productivity methodology. So like I don't know, but I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, sorry. So it's what is it? The brain, I think it's something along the lines of, someone's going to have to correct this for me. The brain is for coming up with ideas, not storing them. And he's got some reference to say that your brain can only hold on to like 4 or 5 things at once. So his methodology is, as soon as you have that thought, to just put it down somewhere. You don't do anything with it. You don't process it. You just put it down.
You just
and then
record
you process. Yeah, exactly. And it's very, very effective. And I think with getting things done, the problem with it, I think, if you don't mold it to yourself and you take the basic framework, is you can become very good at being efficient, doing lots of things, but not necessarily very good at being effective, not doing the right things. And you can get very busy, and you can end up filling your day with crap and getting lots of things done, but they're not really always important things. So it's important to make that distinction. But if you can realize that and then take the practice and then adapt it to your own way of working, it's effective. And I have that list that I put things into. I have a notepad in my bedstand, because I have things come up in my head and falling asleep or whatever. And then at the moment I tend to process it once or twice a week, and that works for me. But it's that's a great way, because that's to your point there. It's like you're going to have, if you can and I guess I'm talking to the real kind of workaholic, like addicted people like me, is if you can schedule fun, right? If you can schedule relaxation, have days dedicated to that, you're going to have those thoughts come up, those creative ideas come up for you, and take advantage of that. Like relax and enjoy the fact that that's going to happen for you, and then just record them and forget about it and enjoy the moment.
Yeah, that just popped into my head as you were describing that whole process. That for optimizing my phone for productivity, one of the things that I want to do is make space on my homepage for the voice recorder app, because I feel like I can stream of consciousness spit my ideas out faster by speaking them than I could by typing them out. So I feel like that's a really good way to go about it, because when you have a voice recording, you can always transcribe that later and clarify what you were trying to say as you are, putting it down in a written form. So yeah, I haven't gotten far enough in getting things done to fully speak to all of that, but I've read about the concept of an in tray, so I already knew that was something I had to add to my list of things to do, or add to my process
totally.
flow.
I think you'll like it. I think if you can take things like GTD, 80-20, Parkinson's Law, and you combine these things, they compound very, very effectively, and you will become even more productive. And you're already a pretty productive guy, but even more so. I think they can be very powerful when combined. Brandon, any kind of parting thoughts on the topics we've discussed? Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, we ran the whole gamut of different conversational topics today, didn't we?
Pretty much.
Yeah, let's see. I think one particularly good one, if we're going to cover for all the topics, one big one for sleep. Because the people that I talk to who struggle with sleep, it's almost always a situation of, the brain running rampant, going down like a path, and it just gets caught in a loop like this. One thing I found incredibly beneficial, I mentioned, was journaling, because what I started doing was I would look at, okay, what are my thoughts about that I'm getting obsessive about when I'm trying to sleep? And for me, it was always about work stuff, and it was usually about what am I going to do with my next day? So at the end of my workday, I started putting down like a bullet point list of like, okay, these are the tasks I'm going to work on the next day. So I took those things, those thoughts that my brain was running rampant with, and I addressed them ahead of time. I preemptively addressed them so that when my brain went to that place to say, you don't have to think about it. You've got literally down to an hour, a bullet point list of all the stuff you're going to do tomorrow. So that's covered. So if you are the type of person like me who has that issue where you struggle with sleep, look at what exactly is causing you to have difficulty sleeping, and then find a way to preempt those thoughts and address them before they ever crop up. So that was a practice that when I've realized that was really, really beneficial for me. And yeah, I mean, I guess it depends who I'm talking to right now. If these are high intensity business owners, I would really reiterate that thing of talking to your clients after your training sessions when they're newer to figure out how to preempt their own self-doubts that they're inevitably going to experience, and those feelings of fear and whatever it is that comes along with high intensity training. Because, the right training approach and the right dietary approach, these are all incredibly important, but I focus and I've been focusing more on things like stress and sleep lately, because when you don't take care of those things and when you're incredibly stressed out, adherence to dietary plans like fall apart very quickly. And so a huge portion of this is the mental game. And so if you take care of the mental game and set people up for success in that way, then you're going to see a greater likelihood of people actually applying the things that they've learned. In the case of high intensity business owners, you're going to see a greater turnover of, I don't know if they do like trial classes into long-term memberships. So if you focus on human behavior and figure out why are people not doing the thing that they know is best for them and that I want them to do, in relation to my business, then you can oftentimes lead to a greater success rate or percentage of outcomes being positive as opposed to negative.
Yeah, I appreciate you ending on that note. And there is actually one more thing I want to ask you in a moment, but I totally agree, by the way, what you said there about planning your day ahead of time. I've got into a terrible habit lately of planning my day in the morning. And what I do is if you look at my
bad Lawrence.
I know. If you look at my I mean, sometimes it can work well for me, but more often than not, it doesn't. So if you look at my day to day, for instance, it's quite hilarious because I've got stuff scheduled like this, right? This podcast is there. It's going to happen regardless, and it will be prepped for. But then there's a bunch of stuff that is like, it's there in the diary to do, but it's not imperative that it gets done. And if you look after this, for instance, there's just, so if you're used to using iCal, there's just about 100 boxes that are just all overlapping each other. Because today has been so disorganized, and if anyone thinks I'm the paragon of productivity, you are mistaken. I have my disorganized days as well, but I, everything will get organized and eventually will get done, because it's if it's there, it's somewhat important. But I completely agree with what you're saying. If I sit down at the end of my work day today and I just take a moment to look at tomorrow and say, and actually schedule out. And for me, I'm very much, I have to block out my calendar. It has all to be in there so that I can just wake up tomorrow and just go bam, bam, bam. And again, it's about, we've talked about other stuff about, effectiveness versus efficiency, 80-20. These things help you identify what to do and when to do it, which is also, well, probably more important than just filling up the calendar. But once you have that down as well, then organizing the day before, and as you say, it just makes you sleep a lot better.
The thing is, you have the distance, you have the time distance between when you are planning the thing and when you are doing the thing. Because oftentimes when I try to plan the day of the tasks for that day, it's like, okay, these are the things I have to do today. And sometimes that little voice in your head can like cause you to second guess yourself. Like, you got to be sure you do this well to make sure that, today's a productive day. Otherwise the day is going to be a waste. And like that, it's like you are so close to the problem, you can't see it. Like, the phrase, you can't see the forest for the trees. It's like, It's like the day before, it's like you can see the whole map. You got the bird's eye view, you're way up above it. So you can see it more clearly and you can look more objectively at the different things that are available for you to do and which ones are going to be the most effective. But when you wait to the day of, it's like you're in the middle of the thicket and you can't see, clearly in any direction because you're just that much more closer for you. You don't have the emotional distance and objectivity you could have if you planned it the day before. And when you just finish a workday, all that stuff is still fresh in your mind, as opposed to after 4 hours of leisure time and 8 hours of sleep. It's the ideas are removed from you and it just doesn't seem as organized and it's more chaotic.
Yeah. I'm inspired.
So start doing it again, Lawrence.
Yeah, I promise, Brandon, I will. Cool. Look, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you've been working on, because I think you've done a great job with your podcast. I really enjoyed a lot of the episodes. So tell us about Deskbound. Tell us about the mission, what you're working on there.
Absolutely, yeah. So for me, it ties back to a bunch of issues, and they can't all be attributed to being desk-bound, to sitting all day, but they are usually at least somewhat affected by it. And you see, what seem like epidemic levels of these problems occurring in people's lives in the modern world. Things like back pain, carpal tunnel-like pain in the hands and wrists, eye strain, weight gain. I think sitting all day affects it. But as we've discussed throughout, I think things like diet and strength training play a larger role. But at the same time, if you could be more active, after a meal and curb that insulin and blood sugar spike, then that would still affect it to a degree. And seeing all of these things that, when I was working in the corporate world before I left to do all of this, I just saw a lot of people who were resigned to that type of suffering as something they were going to have to deal with for the rest of their life. And when I came across all this, the story I always relate is when I was 23, I did full-time university and a full-time desk job and closed on a house. And I did that all at the same time. And that's when I ended up like really overweight and just like in pain and all these kinds of things. So I turned to my coworkers and asked them like, hey, like, what do you do about this? And they're like, oh no, that's just kind of how it is. And as a 23-year-old, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like this, really, I'm 23. This is what I have to look forward to for the rest of my life. So I ended up diving into all this stuff. And, I'm happy with what I did with Deskbound, what I guess you would call like season 1 of it. I think a lot of great information came up, but I also think it was a little bit unfocused and kind of undirectional. It's called Deskbound, but it was a general health and wellness podcast where I interviewed people about every subject. And I tried to always relate it back to that. But what I'm planning to do move forward is take more of a singular focus So I'm planning to interview a lot of people specifically about the different aspects of physiology of sitting and really hone in on that one subject so I can build up a higher level of knowledge and really create a comprehensive body of work that addresses that one subject before I then move on to another subject. So that's like what is it now? Oh God, it's 2019. I just turned 30 a few weeks ago, so I'm having a bit of a time crisis right now. So for me, that's like my goal for the next year and the direction I'm planning to take Deskbound in. After this, obviously, I'm going to publish this interview of ours on mine as well. But after that, it's solely focusing on the sitting angle because I really want to understand and, not that you can fully solve, but solve that issue for as many people as possible so that we all have a much greater breadth of understanding about it. And doing it in the way that I normally do, which I think I do a pretty good job of breaking down these very complex subjects into something that even the layman who's listening can understand. So that's kind of the state of the union of Deskbound for the foreseeable future.
Cool. Yeah, I know what you mean. And corporate warrior. I have a same issue with vagueness of topics over time. But watch this space. There's things happening in the background where there will be a far. I mean, it's no secret that this is about high intensity training and hit business. But the business name does not lend itself to that. The business name has lost its relevance. It has a sentimental value to it, and it's just become a brand that I've become recognized for in my strategic niche, so to speak. But it's it will be changing. So I think that's my first public announcement of that. But yes, I support what you're doing, and I think that it's very intelligent to niche down. And I think that if you could create something that's more focused around the physiology of sitting, the pros and cons. I don't know if there's many pros aside from the fact that you can do stuff on your laptop.
It's comfortable.
Oh yes, there is that. Yeah. That is true. But yeah, I think that could be really, really interesting because I don't know of anyone that has. When I think do you know what, if I think right now, because this is how branding works, right? Or why categories are important. Is who do I think of when I think of sitting expert? I think of Katie Bowman. You know her?
The name sounds really familiar. What is she known for? What is her work?
Well, I just remember listening to her. I think it was on Ben Greenfield's podcast, and she's from what I remember. I don't know if she's a MD or I'm not sure what her credentials are, but she was an expert on sitting, movement in general, sleeping, and I believe she's a real advocate of she's from what I remember.
Is she a barefoot advocate?
Probably.
Okay,
she's from what I remember, she's quite, I mean, some people would see her as being quite extreme because she doesn't sleep in a bed. I'm pretty sure she sleeps on a hard floor.
Oh, yeah?
And she's about practically zero sitting and potentially barefoot movement. She might have changed. This has been a good 5 or 6 years since I listened to her speak. But she fills that bucket for me. But that being said, I can't think of anyone who's really done an enormous body of work on sitting. So
I think that she's definitely got more knowledge on the subject than most. I think that the thing is that's not hard to do because the topic of sitting is not a particularly sexy topic, and it's not one that many people in the health and wellness industry feel drawn towards. I think that the most comprehensive and useful resource in this would probably be actually the book which inspired the name for my podcast, Deskbound by Kelly Starrett, the founder of CrossFit. Now, the problem with that is that, Kelly's an incredibly brilliant man, but he doesn't really land the plane, so to speak. Like, he operates at and thinks at and writes at such a high level that for the layman, it's like they're not even going to remotely understand a word that he's saying. And that's a big problem with so many experts. It's like the curse of knowledge. You forget what it's like to be a beginner, and you can't make what you're talking about relatable to the average person. And that's what I always do, what I always try to keep in mind. Like, could my brother who doesn't know anything about this stuff understand what I'm saying right now? And if he can't, then I need to come up with a story or a metaphor or a simpler explanation to, as I say, land the plane, to make it relatable and accessible to everybody, because the people who are going to be hesitant and resistant to, new dietary plans or new exercise things or things like that, who are unhealthy and sitting all day, I have to make it like the one subreddit, explain it like I'm 5. Like, I need to make it that simple, because if your goal as a health and wellness professional is to help people improve their health and their lives, then you need to craft your message and craft your lesson that you're teaching them in a way that they are most likely to actually apply it and get the results that you know they're capable of getting. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing them and yourself a disservice.
Have you seen Margin Call?
No,
the TV show. I've only seen clips. I haven't watched like a full episode. It's about the financial crisis, and it's centered around the biggest hedge fund, or it might even be a fictional big hedge fund in America. And Jeremy Irons plays like the owner or the senior partner or what have you in the hedge fund. And they're having this big meeting about this impending kind of financial crash is about to happen, and the analysts, the senior analysts, can see this coming, and they're in the boardroom, and it's a very intimidating scene because everyone's scared of the big boss, and they're all sitting there, and the analyst character has to basically explain to this big boss man what's happening, and he starts saying all this technical jargon around finance, and Jeremy Irons plays the big boss, and he says, talk to me. He stops the guy, says, shut up. He says, talk to me as if you're talking to a golden retriever.
Exactly.
And he said, it's not brains that got me this far. And I thought that was just brilliant. I mean, Jeremy Irons is a great actor, but I haven't even watched it. You'd think I'd see that clip on YouTube, be like, right, I got to watch this, but hey, info overwhelm. Brandon, this has been a lot of fun, mate. What's the best way for the listeners to find out more about you?
You can find the Duskbound podcast and all of our shop and everything related to that at duskbound.co. And we're on most podcast players just as the Duskbound podcast. Duskbound is one word, and you can keep up with us there. Haven't published anything new in a little while, except for this one once it goes live, but we're going to have plenty more coming out in the future.
And you sell standing desks, don't you?
Yes, we do sell standing desks on there. I hadn't planned to do this, but and we only sell them in the States. But if any of your listeners are interested in picking one up, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think is a good coupon? I'll do coupon code Lawrence on there, and you can get $50 off a standing desk.
Don't do that. It's too. People will spell that wrong. Do something like do CW. Just do CW.
No, let's do HIT. HIT.
HIT.
Nice and easy.
Okay.
We'll do coupon
Sounds
code
good.
HIT. You can get $50 off a standing desk if you want to pick one up.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate the offer. And just think about it, guys. See, this is my little sales pitch now. If you've got a high-intensity training studio, you've got an office there, maybe your clients can see, and if you've got a standing desk, it just looks great. It looks like you really care about your movement, and it's going to send the right impression. I encourage you to support Brandon.
A whole other thing on that is I've thought of doing this before, of setting up some sort of affiliate deal. So maybe if we get that going, if you want to promote standing desks to your clients, we can get some sort of mutually beneficial arrangement set up. But we'll push that down the line for now.
Maybe something for the future.
Yeah.
Awesome. And for everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode, please go to corporatewarrior.co/case study. And for all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for tuning in. To check out any book recommendations, tips, and other resources mentioned, go to our website, duskbound.co/episode 22 to see the full show notes. And while you're there, click the free course button at the top to learn how sedentary life damages your health and what you can do about it.